The raid. The twin moons of Zifra, 9, shone brightly in the night sky, casting a silver glow over the peaceful colony below. It was a quiet world, untouched by war, where families lived in harmony, far away from the chaos of the galaxy. Rilke, a young Zifran woman, stood outside her home, enjoying the cool night air. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, listening to the soft hum of the wind through the crystal trees. It was supposed to be another quiet night. Then, the sky exploded. A deep, thunderous roar ripped through the heavens, and Rilke's eyes shot open. She saw it, massive black ships breaking through the clouds, their engines screaming as they descended toward the colony. Flames and smoke followed in their wake. Her heart pounded. Raiders. Before she could move, the first blast hit. Chaos and fire. The explosion shattered the ground near her, sending a shockwave through the air. Rilke was thrown back, crashing hard against the ground. Her ears rang, her vision blurred. Screams filled the night. She forced herself up, coughing from the dust. The colony was burning. Buildings crumbled, fires spread through the streets. Shadows moved between the flames, figures in dark armor, carrying energy rifles. Raiders. They were brutal, merciless creatures from the far reaches of space, attacking unarmed worlds for supplies, slaves, and sport. Rilke's breath hitched as she saw them dragging people out of their homes. Her people. No. No, 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 she whispered, her hands trembling. Her mother. Her father. Her little brother, where were they? She ran. A desperate search. She sprinted through the burning streets, her lungs aching from the smoke. Around her, chaos unfolded, some fought back, but they were no match for the raiders' weapons. Bodies lay in the dirt, lifeless. The smell of blood filled the air. She reached her home, her heart hammering. It was already destroyed. The walls had collapsed, flames consuming everything. Her family was nowhere. Rilke choked back a sob. She was too late. Then, a voice. A child's scream. Her eyes widened. Tynel. Her little brother. He was alive. She turned toward the sound and saw him, a small, frightened boy, trapped in the grip of a raider. The alien warrior was tall and monstrous, his reptilian face twisted into a cruel grin. He lifted Tynel effortlessly, his claws tightening around the child's small arm. Rilke's blood turned to ice. She had to stop them. Without thinking, she grabbed a metal rod from the rubble and charged. She swung with everything she had. The rod smashed into the raider's helmet, making him stumble back. The warrior turned his gaze on her, his grin vanishing. Rilke barely had time to react before a massive fist slammed into her stomach. Pain exploded through her body. She collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Tynel screamed her name. The last thing Rilke saw before darkness took her was the raider carrying her brother away. Taken. Pain. That was the first thing she felt when she woke up. Her body ached, her head throbbed. She wasn't on Zifra 9 anymore. She was in a dark, metallic room, the air thick with the scent of oil and sweat. The cold metal floor beneath her burned against her skin. She wasn't alone. Dozens of other captives sat in silence, their faces filled with despair. Some were injured, others barely conscious. She tried to move, but her wrists were bound in energy restraints. The realization hit her like a blade to the chest. She had been taken. She wasn't dead. But she might wish she was. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the room. A raider entered, his dark armor gleaming under the dim lights. His voice was rough, filled with amusement. Welcome to your new life. The unexpected stranger. Hours passed. Maybe days. Rilke sat in silence, her mind numb. Her brother was gone. Her family was gone. Her home was gone. Everything she had ever known, taken from her in one night. She felt nothing anymore. Then, the door opened again. A figure stepped in, but this one was different. No dark armor. No cruel expression. A human. He was tall, with rough features and a confident smirk. His piercing eyes scanned the room, landing on her. He stepped closer and crouched in front of her. Rilke, right? Her body tensed. Who are you? The human leaned in slightly, his voice calm. The guy who's getting you out of here. Her breath caught in her throat. What? Before she could react, he pressed a small device against her restraints. There was a soft beep, then the cuffs unlocked. Rilke stared at him in shock. Stay quiet, he whispered. We're leaving. The alarm blared. The escape had begun. The mysterious human. The alarm blared like a beast awakened from slumber, flashing red lights casting eerie shadows across the cold steel walls. Rilke's wrists were finally free, the energy restraints now nothing more than useless scrap on the floor. But her heart still pounded, her body still frozen in disbelief. The human crouched in front of her, one knee on the grimy floor, his sharp eyes scanning her face. You good? He asked casually, as if this was a normal conversation. Rilke's throat was dry. Who are you? The man smirked. Darren Cross. You can thank me later. But first. A loud explosion rocked the ship. Darren stood up, tossing her a small, sleek-looking weapon. We need to move. Now. The breakout begins. Rilke barely caught the weapon before Darren yanked her up. Her legs were weak from exhaustion, but she pushed forward, stumbling after him. They burst into the narrow hallways of the raiders' warship, alarms screaming in every direction. Rilke looked around. Bodies lay on the floor, raiders. The human had already fought through them. She turned to him in disbelief. You did this? Darren didn't even slow down. You sound surprised. She was. Raider warships were fortresses. Their warriors were brutal, elite fighters who had conquered countless planets. Yet this human was cutting through them like they were nothing. He turned a corner, raising his blaster. One raider barely had time to react before Darren shot him in the knee, then finished him with a strike to the head. Rilke flinched. He was fast. Precise. Dangerous. Not like any human she had ever heard of. Why are you helping me? They sprinted past a flickering control panel. Darren stopped just long enough to slam a small device onto it. The ship lurched. The lights flickered. A low warning voice echoed through the halls. System override detected. Ship lockdown disengaged. Darren smirked. That should keep them busy. Rilke grabbed his arm. Wait. Darren raised an eyebrow. Why are you helping me? She demanded. He was silent for a moment. Then, with no expression, he answered. Because you're not supposed to be here. Rilke frowned. What? Darren exhaled sharply. You think this was just a random raid? It wasn't. Your people were targeted. Rilke felt a chill crawl up her spine. Targeted? Before she could ask more, heavy footsteps echoed behind them. Darren's jaw tightened. We don't have time for questions. Let's go. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her forward. But now, Rilke wasn't just running for escape. She was running for answers. The hunter arrives. They reached a loading bay, a massive steel chamber filled with stolen cargo and abandoned ships. Their escape route. Darren pointed to a sleek, black fighter. That's our ride. Rilke's heart soared. They were so close. Then, a deep, growling voice filled the air. You really thought you could leave? Rilke froze. Darren cursed under his breath. Of course. A figure stepped forward from the shadows. A raider captain. He was twice the size of a human, his scaled armor gleaming under the dim lights. Deep scars ran across his face, and his yellow eyes glowed with malice. That one is ours, the captain snarled, pointing at Rilke. Hand her over, and I'll let you leave in one piece. Darren didn't hesitate. Yeah, see, that's not gonna happen. The captain grinned. Then you die here, human. The fight for freedom. The captain moved fast. Faster than any raider Rilke had ever seen. He swung a massive blade straight at Darren. Darren ducked at the last second, the blade slicing through the air where his head had been. He twisted, pulling out his blaster, but the captain was already on him. Rilke's breath caught. Darren wasn't winning this fight. She had seen how strong raiders were. Darren was fast, but not strong enough. The captain grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. Darren struggled, coughing. Humans are weak, the captain sneered. Always have been. Rilke's hands shook. She wasn't a warrior. But she had already lost everything once. She wouldn't lose again. She moved. The blaster Darren had given her, she aimed and fired. A perfect shot. The blast hit the captain's shoulder, making him roar in pain. Darren used the distraction. He slammed his knee into the captain's face, breaking free. Then, without missing a beat, he grabbed the fallen blade and drove it straight through the captain's chest. The raider captain's eyes widened in shock. Darren leaned in. Humans aren't weak. With one final push, he ended it. The captain collapsed. Silence filled the hangar. Rilke stood frozen, her breathing uneven. Darren turned to her, still catching his breath. Nice shot. She blinked. Had she just helped kill a raider captain? Her fingers tightened around the blaster. For the first time since the raid, she felt power. The escape. Darren grabbed her arm. Come on. We need to move. They sprinted toward the fighter, the ship's alarms now screaming. Darren jumped into the pilot's seat, flicking switches at lightning speed. Rilke climbed in beside him as the hangar doors began to close. The ship lifted off. The raiders tried to block them. But Darren was faster. With a single push of the thrusters, they blasted out of the warship. The stars stretched before them. They were free. But as they soared through the dark void of space, Rilke finally turned to Darren. Her voice was steady now. Tell me everything. Darren didn't look at her. He simply muttered, You're not gonna like it. The ship vanished into the darkness. This was only the beginning. The truth about Darren. The stolen fighter soared through the darkness of space, its engines humming as the warship behind them shrank into the void. Rilke sat stiffly in the co-pilot's seat, her fingers curled around the armrest. Her heart was still racing from the fight, from the impossible escape, from the human who had just taken down a raider captain. Darren sat at the controls, calm as ever, guiding the ship through the stars like this was just another day for him. It was too quiet. Finally, Rilke broke the silence. Talk, she demanded. Darren didn't glance at her. About what? You know exactly what, she snapped. Why did you come for me? Why was my colony attacked? Who are you really? Darren let out a slow breath. You sure you want to know? Rilke's jaw tightened. I lost everything tonight. My family. My people. My home. You don't get to keep me in the dark. Darren was quiet for a moment. Then, finally, he said it. The raiders weren't after your colony. They were after you. Rilke's blood ran cold. The target. Rilke stared at him. Me? Darren nodded. She shook her head. That doesn't make sense. I was just a healer. I had no power, no status, why would they want me? Darren tapped a few controls, pulling up a holographic display. It was a list of colonies. Destroyed colonies. Zifra 9 was just one name on the list. You weren't the first, Darren said. And you won't be the last. Rilke's stomach twisted. What is this? Darren leaned back. Someone out there is erasing species. One by one. Colony by colony. And no one's talking about it. Rilke felt sick. Her home wasn't an accident. Her people weren't just collateral damage. They were hunted. Her voice wavered. Why me? Darren hesitated. Then, he looked her dead in the eyes. Because of what you are. The bloodline secret. Rilke's heart pounded. What am I? Darren rubbed the back of his neck. I was hoping you'd tell me. She shook her head. I don't know what you're talking about. Darren studied her for a long moment. Then, he pulled something from his belt. A data chip. He inserted it into the ship's terminal. The display changed, a glowing symbol appeared on the screen. Rilke froze. It was the royal crest of Zifra. The insignia of her ancestors. Darren watched her reaction carefully. You recognize it. Rilke couldn't breathe. This was impossible. Her people had no rulers. No empire. The bloodline was gone. Wiped out centuries ago. But if that were true, why was her crest on a classified data chip? She turned to Darren, her voice shaking. What did you find? Darren exhaled. Your people aren't extinct, Rilke. They were erased. The hunters in the dark. Rilke couldn't believe it. Her entire life, she had been told her species were peaceful explorers. That their empire had faded long before she was born. But if Darren was telling the truth. Someone had been systematically hunting her kind. And she had been next. Darren watched her carefully. You see why I got you out now? Rilke swallowed hard. You're saying I was a target. That my people are being wiped out. But, why? Darren's expression darkened. Because of whatever they're hiding. And I think you're the key. A cold chill ran through her. I don't know anything, she whispered. Darren smirked. Maybe not. But someone thinks you do. Suddenly, the ship's console beeped. Darren's smirk vanished. We've got company. Nowhere left to run. Rilke turned to the radar. 3 ships. Closing in fast. Darren cursed under his breath. I thought we had more time. Rilke's chest tightened. Who is it? Darren's hands moved rapidly over the controls. Not raiders. The ships broke through hyperspace, sleek, black vessels, moving like shadows in the void. Assassins. Darren gritted his teeth. Looks like the people who wanted you dead just found out you're still breathing. The ship's warning alarms blared as the pursuers locked on. Hold on, Darren growled. Then, with one sharp pull, he threw them into a chaotic spiral through the stars. The chase was on. The hunt begins. The ship shuddered violently as laser fire streaked past, lighting up the darkness of space. Darren gripped the controls, jaw clenched. They're fast. Rilke braced herself as the ship twisted, spinning wildly to dodge the incoming fire. The G-force crushed her into her seat, but Darren barely flinched. The radar blared warnings, 3 black ships, closing in fast. Not raiders. Not mercenaries. Something worse. Assassins. Who are they? Rilke gasped. Darren didn't answer. He yanked the throttle, sending the ship into a steep dive toward a nearby asteroid field. Brace yourself, he shouted. Rilke barely had time to grab the seat before they shot into the swirling chaos of asteroids. No escape. Darren twisted the ship through impossible gaps, dodging massive spinning rocks. The enemy ships followed, matching his every move. Rilke's breath came fast. They weren't just chasing them. They were hurting them. "They're pushing us towards something," she shouted. Darren's eyes flicked over the radar. "I see it. Ahead, a massive, derelict warship, floating dead in space. A graveyard of metal. A trap." Darren gritted his teeth. "They want us boxed in. A direct confrontation." He cursed under his breath. "Can you fight?" he asked. Rilke hesitated. "Not like you." Darren smirked. "Then it's time to learn." Boarding the ghost ship. A sudden shockwave slammed into them. One of the enemy ships fired a disabling EMP blast. The controls flickered. The ship went dark. Rilke's heart stopped. "We're dead." Darren's smirk didn't fade. "Not yet." The ship drifted into the ruined warship's gravity field, metal groaning as they scraped against the wreckage. Darren stood up, grabbed a weapon, and tossed one to Rilke. "Time to see what you're made of." Before she could respond, the ship's airlock breached. They were coming. The first kill. Rilke's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the cold metal of the wrecked ship's corridor. Heavy boots echoed through the halls. The assassins had boarded. Darren crouched low, weapon steady. His breathing was too calm. Like he had done this 1,000 times. Rilke? She had never killed anything before. But the moment the first assassin stepped into view, something inside her shifted. The enemy was tall, covered in sleek black armor, a silent killer. His weapon raised toward Darren. Rilke didn't think. She moved. The blaster in her hands fired before she even realized it. The assassin stumbled back, hit in the chest. Rilke's arms shook. Her first kill. Darren glanced at her, impressed. Not bad. But there were more coming. A lot more. Darren reloaded. Stay close. No hesitation. Rilke swallowed hard. There was no turning back. The assassin's message. They moved through the dark corridors, silent hunters in the graveyard of war. More assassins came. Darren fought like a ghost. Rilke? She fought like someone who had nothing left to lose. One by one, the assassins fell, but not before one of them spoke. You can't run from this, Bloodborne. Rilke froze. Bloodborne. She grabbed the assassin by the collar, slamming him into the wall. What did you call me? The dying assassin smirked through his mask. You don't even know what you are, do you? Rilke's hands trembled. Tell me. The assassin laughed. Then, his suit self-destructed. Boom. Darren yanked her back just before the explosion. The assassin was gone. Rilke's breath came in short gasps. She looked at Darren. He met her gaze. They know who you are. And they're afraid. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. She wasn't just a survivor. She was something bigger. Something the galaxy feared. The hunt is over, the war begins. Darren pulled her to her feet. We need to move. Now. But. Darren cut her off. No more questions. We survive first. We fight later. The wrecked warship shook as their stolen ship powered back up. Darren grabbed the radio, voice sharp. I hope you're still in one piece, because we're leaving. The AI flickered on. Engines at 30%. Enough to run, not enough to fight. Rilke's fists clenched. She didn't want to run. Not anymore. Darren studied her, reading her expression. He knew. One fight at a time, he said. The ship lurched forward, bursting from the wreckage and into open space. The assassins were gone, for now. But Rilke knew they would return. Because she wasn't just a random survivor anymore. She was a threat. And the war for the truth had just begun. The blood-borne revelation. The stolen ship drifted through deep space, its hull battered, its engines barely holding together after the escape. Inside, Rilke sat in silence. The word echoed in her mind, over and over. Blood-borne. The assassin had spoken it with certainty, with fear. She turned to Darren, who sat at the controls, scanning for any remaining threats. He knew something. She could feel it. "You're not telling me everything," Rilke finally said. Darren exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. "I was hoping to avoid this conversation for a little longer." Rilke clenched her fists. "Too bad. I just killed for the first time, got hunted across the stars, and apparently, I'm some kind of galactic secret. So start talking." Darren met her gaze. He wasn't smirking anymore. "You ever heard of the Zypherian War?" he asked. Rilke's stomach tightened. "That's a myth." Darren's expression hardened. "No, it's not. It was a massacre." Rilke shook her head. "No, we were a peaceful race. We never went to war. We." She stopped. Because she realized something. That's what she had always been told. She had never questioned it. Darren tapped a button on the control panel. A hologram appeared in the air. A battlefield. Ruined cities. Dead planets. And in the middle of it all, her people. Zypherians. Not as victims. As warriors. The Forgotten War. Rilke's hands trembled as she stared at the hologram. "This isn't real," she whispered. "This can't be real." Darren leaned forward. "It's real. Your ancestors weren't just peaceful explorers. They were rulers. Conquerors. And then, someone erased them." Rilke shook her head. "If that's true, why doesn't anyone know?" Darren pointed at her. "Because they made sure no one remembered." "Who?" Darren's voice was grim. "Your own kind." Rilke's breath caught. "What?" Darren tapped the screen, zooming in on one image. An ancient Zypherian crest. The same one he had shown her before. "The Zypherian Empire was powerful," Darren said. "Too powerful. Other civilizations feared them. Wars broke out. And in the end, your ancestors chose survival over victory." Rilke's head spun. "You're saying, we erased ourselves?" Darren nodded. "They destroyed their own history. Wiped their genetic records. Scattered their people across the stars and swore to never rebuild their empire." His eyes locked onto hers. "But they couldn't erase their bloodline." Rilke felt like the air had been stolen from her lungs. Blood-borne. She wasn't just any survivor. She was living proof that the Zypherian Empire had once existed. And someone powerful, wanted to make sure she never lived long enough to remember. The assassin's warning. The ship's lights flickered as a low-pitched alarm echoed through the cockpit. Darren's expression turned sharp. "We've got an incoming transmission." Rilke straightened. "From who?" Darren didn't answer. He just pressed a button. A distorted holographic figure appeared. Cloaked in shadow, its face hidden behind a glowing mask. But the voice? Cold. Mechanical. And inhuman. "You should have stayed dead, blood-borne." Rilke felt ice crawl through her veins. Darren's grip on the controls tightened. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer him. It spoke only to her. "You are the last stain of an empire that should not exist. Your blood is dangerous. Surrender now, and you will be granted a swift death. Rilke's hands trembled, but her fear was fading. In its place, rage. You burned my colony, she said through clenched teeth. Killed my people. Hunted me like an animal. She stepped forward, her voice like steel. Now you want me to surrender? Come and take me yourself. The hologram was silent for a moment. Then, it laughed. So be it, blood-born. The hunt ends soon. The hologram vanished. The ship's sensors screamed with alerts. Darren's voice was sharp. Multiple ships inbound. We need to move. Rilke barely heard him. She turned toward the cockpit window, staring at the endless stretch of stars. Her people had erased themselves out of fear. But fear wouldn't save her now. She was blood-born. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't running anymore. She was ready to fight. The blood-born revelation. The stolen ship drifted through deep space, its hull battered, its engines barely holding together after the escape. Inside, Rilke sat in silence. The word echoed in her mind, over and over. Blood-born. The assassin had spoken it with certainty, with fear. She turned to Darren, who sat at the controls, scanning for any remaining threats. He knew something. She could feel it. You're not telling me everything, Rilke finally said. Darren exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. I was hoping to avoid this conversation for a little longer. Rilke clenched her fists. Too bad. I just killed for the first time, got hunted across the stars, and apparently, I'm some kind of galactic secret. So start talking. Darren met her gaze. He wasn't smirking anymore. You ever heard of the Zypherian War? He asked. Rilke's stomach tightened. That's a myth. Darren's expression hardened. No, it's not. It was a massacre. Rilke shook her head. No, we were a peaceful race. We never went to war. She stopped. Because she realized something. That's what she had always been told. She had never questioned it. Darren tapped a button on the control panel. A hologram appeared in the air. A battlefield. Ruined cities. Dead planets. And in the middle of it all, her people. Zypherians. Not as victims. As warriors. The Forgotten War. Rilke's hands trembled as she stared at the hologram. This isn't real, she whispered. This can't be real. Darren leaned forward. It's real. Your ancestors weren't just peaceful explorers. They were rulers. Conquerors. And then, someone erased them. Rilke shook her head. If that's true, why doesn't anyone know? Darren pointed at her. Because they made sure no one remembered. Who? Darren's voice was grim. Your own kind. Rilke's breath caught. What? Darren tapped the screen, zooming in on one image. An ancient Zypherian crest. The same one he had shown her before. The Zypherian Empire was powerful, Darren said. Too powerful. Other civilizations feared them. Wars broke out. And in the end, your ancestors chose survival over victory. Rilke's head spun. You're saying, we erased ourselves? Darren nodded. They destroyed their own history. Wiped their genetic records. Scattered their people across the stars and swore to never rebuild their empire. His eyes locked onto hers. But they couldn't erase their bloodline. Rilke felt like the air had been stolen from her lungs. Blood-born. She wasn't just any survivor. She was living proof that the Zypherian Empire had once existed. And someone powerful, wanted to make sure she never lived long enough to remember. The assassin's warning. The ship's lights flickered as a low-pitched alarm echoed through the cockpit. Darren's expression turned sharp. "We've got an incoming transmission." Rilke straightened. "From who?" Darren didn't answer. He just pressed a button. A distorted holographic figure appeared. Cloaked in shadow, its face hidden behind a glowing mask. But the voice? Cold. Mechanical. And inhuman. "You should have stayed dead, bloodborne." Rilke felt ice crawl through her veins. Darren's grip on the controls tightened. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer him. It spoke only to her. "You are the last stain of an empire that should not exist. Your blood is dangerous. Surrender now, and you will be granted a swift death." Rilke's hands trembled, but her fear was fading. In its place, rage. "You burned my colony," she said through clenched teeth. "Killed my people. Hunted me like an animal." She stepped forward, her voice like steel. "Now you want me to surrender? Come and take me yourself." The hologram was silent for a moment. Then, it laughed. "So be it, bloodborne. The hunt ends soon." The hologram vanished. The ship's sensors screamed with alerts. Darren's voice was sharp. "Multiple ships inbound. We need to move." Rilke barely heard him. She turned toward the cockpit window, staring at the endless stretch of stars. Her people had erased themselves out of fear. But fear wouldn't save her now. She was bloodborne. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't running anymore. She was ready to fight. The rise of the bloodborne. The silence after battle was always the loudest. The shattered remains of the Silence fleet drifted through space, their warships reduced to little more than burning wreckage. The vast darkness of the void stretched endlessly before them, but for the first time in her life, Rilke didn't feel small. She stood at the viewport of the stolen warship, her silver-lit eyes reflecting the dying embers of their enemies. Darren leaned against the console, watching her carefully. "You did it," he said. Rilke didn't turn. "No. This was just the first battle." Darren sighed. "You really want to bring back an empire?" Rilke finally looked at him. "Not an empire. A reckoning." The Silence had spent centuries erasing her kind. Now, it was time for them to know what it felt like to be hunted. The first mission. Darren tapped the holographic map, shifting through hundreds of old star charts, searching for any sign of other bloodborne. "So where exactly do we find your people?" Rilke exhaled. "My ancestors scattered across the stars, hiding in places no one would ever look." Darren raised an eyebrow. "Great. So we're looking for a lost civilization with no records, no locations, and no idea if they're even still alive." She smirked. "Now you get it." Darren groaned. "I should have left you in that cell." Rilke patted his shoulder. "Too late for that." Then, the ship's sensors blared. An unknown signal. Darren frowned. "We've got a transmission." Rilke's heartbeat quickened. "From who?" Darren pressed a button. The holographic message flickered to life. A figure in a hooded cloak. Their face was hidden, but their voice. It was Zypherian. "You are not alone, bloodborne." Rilke stiffened. "If you seek the survivors, follow the path to the dead star. But beware. The Silence is not your only enemy." The message ended. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Darren muttered, "Well, that sounds like a trap." Rilke's eyes narrowed. "Maybe." She turned toward the navigation console, her fingers dancing over the controls. "But we're going anyway." Darren sighed, rubbing his temples. "Of course we are." The ship jumped into hyperspace. The dead star. The ship dropped out of hyperspace, and before them loomed a star unlike any other. A massive, dying sun, collapsed in on itself, pulsing with an eerie, unnatural light. Orbiting it? Ruins. A graveyard of warships, ancient and broken. And in the middle of it all, a single, untouched structure. A temple. Rilke's breath caught. The Hall of the Bloodborne, she whispered. Darren blinked. That's a real thing. She nodded. It was where the greatest warriors of my kind once trained. If there are survivors, they'll be here. Darren exhaled. All right then. Let's knock on the door. The ship descended. The test of the worthy. The temple's entrance was massive, etched with glowing symbols older than time. The moment Rilke stepped forward, something shifted. A deep, thunderous voice echoed through the chamber. Only the worthy may enter. Darren blinked. Great. A magic door. Then, the ground trembled. Figures emerged from the shadows. Not silence assassins. Not ghosts of the past. Bloodborne. Survivors. Warriors. Hidden for centuries. Their leader stepped forward, his silver eyes locking onto Rilke's. You have awakened the power. But that alone does not make you one of us. Rilke lifted her chin. Then what does? The warrior smirked. Surviving what comes next. The Bloodborne attacked. The trial. Rilke dodged the first strike, twisting away just as a plasma blade slashed through the air where her head had been. She wasn't fighting assassins now. She was fighting her own kind. Darren backed up, raising his hands. I assume this is your fight. Stay out of it, Rilke growled. The warriors were fast. Faster than anything she had ever faced. But she was faster now too. Her instincts took over, her body moving in ways it had never moved before, the blood of her ancestors guiding her. The battle was brutal. And when it finally ended, Rilke stood victorious. Blood trickled from a cut on her cheek, but she was still standing. The warrior leader grinned. You fight like a true Bloodborne. Then he knelt. The others followed. Darren raised an eyebrow. Well, that was dramatic. The leader looked up at Rilke. We have waited for a new queen. A leader to bring back what was lost. Rilke's breath hitched. Queen. No. She wasn't here to rule. She was here to fight. She lifted her gaze to the gathered warriors. Not a queen, she said. A weapon. The warriors rose as one. The Bloodborne had returned. And the galaxy was about to change forever. The war begins. As their fleet prepared for battle, Darren stood beside Rilke, arms crossed. So, what's the plan, Your Majesty? She smirked. We take the fight to the silence. Darren chuckled. I was hoping you'd say that. The stars stretched before them. The silence thought they had erased the Zypherian Empire. But they had failed. The Bloodborne were back. And this time, they weren't fighting to survive. They were fighting to win.